Bruce is an educator with the University of Minnesota Extension Office, specializing in community economics, based in Rochester. Bruce engages with chambers of commerce, economic development leaders, tourism committees, and local governments as they analyze and improve their local economies. So, please welcome Mr. Schwartau.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. You know, as I was preparing for this, I thought, we're going to see 5 people tonight. So I really am pleased to see all of you here tonight. This is going to be, I've come to several of the presentations, and this is going to be maybe a little bit different. No, we're not going to be doing Greek dancing tonight or anything like that. But rather than this being my presentation, this is going to be our presentation, because those of you who are in the audience have a lot of local knowledge that really is going to play an important part in what's going to be happening in our future in this area. This is going to be really feeding into these other presentations that Ann just talked about. We're going to be talking a little bit about immigrants tonight. We're going to be talking a little bit about DMC tonight. We're just going to be touching on them. They're going to get into it a little bit more fully. But we're really going to be looking at kind of an introduction. My goal is that when you leave here and you start seeing newspaper headlines, that all of a sudden you realize, you know, this might have an effect on our economy. And how do I feel about it? You know, do I think we should pursue this, or do I think, no, we probably shouldn't pursue it? So, in order to get you used to that it's your meeting, I need everyone to raise your hand, one hand or the other. Okay, now those of you who live in the city limits of Rochester can lower your hand. Okay, so we have a few people. I'd just like to know, what city are you from? I know this one because this is my wife. She's in Casson.
St. Louis Park, Minnesota.
And St. Louis Park. Now, did I miss anyone else? Okay, because we did invite a number of people from all across southeast Minnesota. Now, you got good practice on raising your hand. You get to do it one more time, and I'll tell you in just a moment. I'm going to show you some quotes. And as soon as you think you know who these quotes are from, go ahead and lower your hand. Now, all 3 quotes come from the same person. So everyone raise your hand. When you think you know who said it, this one is the most important single ingredient of the formula of success is knowing how to get along with people. The same person also said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. How often have you heard that one? The last one, speak softly and carry a big stick. Okay, for those of you who maybe didn't catch it, they're all from Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was the 26th president of the United States. Served from 1901 to like 1909. He was really known as the trust buster. You know, he really enforced these antitrust laws that we had, trying to break up those big trusts. He really was a progressive president. One of the things that he really wanted to see accomplished was the Panama Canal. Until this time, actually France was the one who was trying to build the Panama Canal. Theodore Roosevelt said, hey, we'll give France $40 million. Otherwise, we're going to build a canal in Nicaragua. So he managed to get that land and actually start the process of getting the Panama Canal built. He was also a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And, I think whenever you look at presidential historians, they usually rate Theodore Roosevelt in the top 5 because of all the things he accomplished and moved this country along. Now, He also added a few more quotes, and this is going to get more into what I'm going to talk about tonight. It's do what you can with what you have where you are. As an economist, oftentimes I consider this asset-based community development. You know, it's taking what you have and then making progress, building on the strengths. Maybe this one kind of related to the Panama Canal, but it's only through labor and painful effort, by grim energy and resolute courage, that we move on to better things. And this one is going to be where we start with the presentation tonight. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing, but the worst thing you can do is do nothing. In other words, get off the dime and make some movement, make some changes, do something. Decisions are needing to be made. When we look at the past, and we look at what has happened in Minnesota and the Rochester area for many years, the decisions that were made in the past really influence where we are now. And we can be proud when we look at some of the things we've got here in Rochester and Minnesota of what those decisions were. Now, in the future, they're going to look back at us and say, did we make the right decisions? Because the decisions we make now are going to affect the future and have that potential of affecting it for a long time. Are our children and grandchildren going to be as proud of the decisions we make as what we are of some of the people that were before us? As one example, Minneapolis and St. Paul, consistently when organizations that rank urban parks and urban environments, Minneapolis and St. Paul consistently come number one and number two in park systems, urban park systems across the country. They're always one and two. Usually they're tied. They just say, we're not going to say which one's one, which one's two. They're both the same. You know, the flowers there from Como Park and St. Paul, the falls are Minnehaha Falls. Part of the reason they rank it, 96% of the people in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, can walk to a park in 10 minutes. The only place that's higher is San Francisco, where 99% can. But it's very easy to get to parks. There's good parks. Ranks higher than Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. And those are cities that are known for very strong parks. And these cities are more important. They rank higher. But the decision on the park system in the Twin Cities was made 100 years ago. If you're ever interested in learning about the the Twin Cities park system, Lakeland Cemetery on Memorial Day has tours that go on, and they take you on buses and they show you the important graves, but they also talk about how did we end up with this park system in the Twin Cities. And it is very, very nice. So, you know, that decision was made 100 years ago. Now, let's look at one that was made here not that long ago. Anyone recognize where this is? It's the Zumbro River. No, not by, you're close. It's not by Apache. It's by the Cub, behind the Cub Foods. It's that park there. Now, maybe if I show you this park, maybe you understand what I'm going to be talking about. The flood control system that we put in. How many of you were here in 1978 when the flood came? How many of you actually had homes that were strongly affected by it? You had a workplace that was. And you see, that's why I put the label on here, economic decision. Because that flood in 1978 really exposed how important flood control was for the city of Rochester and to develop what's going to happen downtown. And the thing is, it wasn't just doing the concrete here at the river itself. It was actually going out and putting the reservoirs all around the city because for some reason the city was built in the bottom of a bowl. And yes, it's going to flood. And you know, we look at the heavy rains we had in 2014. Really, we weren't affected that very much here. Think of how Winona was affected by floods here a few years ago. We have managed to survive these heavy rains that we've had recently because a decision was made. We're going to invest, what, 96 million, something like that, in flood control system and manage this problem. It was a quality of life decision. It preserved property. It preserved the downtown economy. It just has been a very important decision for us. Decision that was made over 100 years ago. That's really affected the future of Rochester ever since. When we had the tornado in 1883, and Sister Mary Alfred Moe said, you know, asked Dr. W.W. Mayo, she said, we will build a hospital if you and your sons will staff it. And what's that done for Rochester? Again, a decision that was made over 100 years ago. One that's not as long ago was IBM showing up in Rochester. Now, I would guess some of you know this story much better than what I know it. But I do know that Thomas Watson Jr., who was going to be the second president of IBM, was a pilot in World War II, and he had a friend in the war who was from Rochester. Does anyone know, is that Fiegel? Fiegel?
Well, in German, I think it'd be a Feigl.
Feigl, yeah.
Here they say Fiegel.
And what had happened was actually he died when he had gone up and visited Thomas Watson. On his flight back, he passed away. He crashed and passed away. When the time came that IBM was deciding where they were going to build a Midwest plant, you know, Rochester had done a good job on presenting its case. Madison, Wisconsin had also done a good job of presenting the case, and they were deciding, is it going to go to Madison or is it going to go to Rochester? When the dedication was held in Rochester, apparently Thomas Watson Jr. told the father of his dead friend he picked it because of his friend. That was the final decision. How much of an effect has that had on the history of Rochester and the way Rochester has progressed? Now, not all decisions can we look at and say they were good decisions. This is a picture of MSP, Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Here's 494, and you've got those two parallel runways that you see, and the planes come over the river valley and land there. Back in the 80s, they were having the discussion, should we expand this airport or should we maybe go someplace else and build a bigger airport, like what Denver did, for example? Well, they decided, we're going to expand this one. So they made the choice. They had these three runways, and they made the choice to build this runway, which kind of runs parallel to Cedar Avenue there and the Mall of America down here. So they added this runway. Anyone see a problem with that runway?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It created a lot of noise in the neighborhood.
It creates a lot of noise, for example, up in here. They were already getting enough here. Anyone else?
Looks like the planes are going to be crossing each other every time they come in and out.
You hit it. In fact, the runway earlier, about a month ago, FAA said, if you are having planes take off on this runway, you cannot have planes landing on this one. they said if a plane is coming here and has to abort its landing, it's going to come right here and possibly intersect a plane taking off. That isn't even anything new, because a few years ago they had asked the airport, why is this runway only being used about 40% less, or 40% of what you originally planned? Well, they said, well, one of our problems is here's our airport where the planes are coming in, and there's a Humphrey terminal over here, or Terminal 2, as it's known now. If you want to take a plane from here and go to here, you have to cross an active runway. So now we've got a runway that is only being used part-time. It was a very expensive process, and now they've actually shut down part of its usage. Was that the right decision to expand at this location, or should they have moved? I don't know. I know one of the places they were looking at was kind of between Cannon Falls and the Twin Cities. You know, that was one of the areas they were looking at. I don't know what the right answer is. But it is a decision that has affected a lot of people. You're always hearing about the noise issues that are occurring in the Twin Cities. And that decision goes back to it. Now, I mentioned a few of the decisions that happened around Rochester with IBM and Mayo. Now you get to tell me. So many of you are Rochester residents. I'd like to hear your input on what you think some of the key decisions are that have affected the way Rochester is. So we've got a couple mics here. Would someone add to our list? Remember I said this is your presentation. It's our presentation. I'm going to put a map up here if that helps you. You don't even have to think of just Rochester. Think of the entire area. Now, the reason I'm giving you the mic is because that way, on the recording, we can actually hear what you say.
In the late 60s, urban renewal was a big thing, and downtown urban renewal was proposed for Rochester, and didn't go ahead with it. I don't know if that was a good decision or a bad decision, but it certainly has affected the development downtown.
Yeah. Who else? Don.
Oh, I think the decision to relocate the airport from where it originally was to the southern outskirts of the Rochester was made a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Because the original airport was where?
Over in the southeast part of town.
Okay. The runways are still there. The runways are still there. Did someone else up here have a comment?
Yes. It's a good thing that they moved the airport out, because the old airport was too crowded. And speaking about the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, it can be dangerous too, because I've gone up there a few times and planes would come in for a landing, and they didn't seem like they were very high. But yeah, I mean, it's too bad that the airport is far out in the country, but then where else are you going to put it? You know, a lot of land now is being developed around here, so at least they have space there. And but the transportation in Rochester, though they have freeways and everything, but it seems that so many people take cars. You know, if they had better shuttle service or commuter service, but then again, like they speak about high rail system to the Twin Cities, but we don't have the population to sustain it, so I don't think that that's viable myself. But they can. There are other ways, but so far I think the transportation is adequate. But the highway, I don't know if they can expand it very much. But I think if they have fewer cars somehow, that would do it.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, we'll let her go first. Excuse me.
A good decision are the walking trail and the biking trails
Okay.
around Rochester.
Okay.
Chuck Azama's focus on going for money's top-rated cities created a sense of spirit within the community that didn't exist before that time.
Yeah. Now, someone has got to mention something that's 100 years old this year, please.
RCTC.
RCTC. The decision to have that college here and that technical college is so important to this area.
I've not been a lifelong citizen of Rochester, but I believe the decision to start the University of Rochester has got to be a wise decision.
All right, I'm going to add a few more to your list that you've brought up. You know, when I look at southern Minnesota here, I think, and I look at Preston and Lanesboro and this area, what do you think I'm thinking of? The bike trails, and how much that has improved the tourism and that whole idea of bluff country and bringing people down there for that. When we look at Winona County, and Winona is very much known for its composite industry. And it's basically a cluster of businesses that have really learned how to use composites well and make products. Harmony Enterprises, located in Harmony. How many of you are familiar with Harmony Enterprises? I see a few hands go up. Harmony Enterprises began, 1962. A number of the business people in Harmony decided they needed to diversify their economy. You know, they had agriculture around there, but there wasn't a lot of other industry. So the businessmen got together, invested some money, and said, we're going to look at products that we can make in Harmony. They developed a backpack ice house. So a portable ice house, you put on your back, you go out on the lake, set it up and drill your hole and go ice fishing. That then expanded into, well, now you had knowledge on using canvas. Well, all these new campers that were now being developed and RVs, now you have the canvas tops that can come out. Or also if they were pop-ups, maybe they were using canvas and for their trailers, the pop-out trailers. Well, finally that kept growing, and finally someone decided, okay, I'll buy out the rest of you. And Harmony Enterprises has developed into one of the major production of compactors. When you have cardboard boxes, remember cardboard boxes used to be at the grocery store and you just help yourself to a cardboard box? Well, then they said, no, you need to crush them and get rid of them. You can't burn them. Then this industry of crushing. And then if you've ever gone to a fast food restaurant where you throw in your trash and you hear, and it's crushing the stuff you throw in the trash bin, Harmony Enterprises. They've expanded so much that 30% of their production goes to 70 countries all across the world. And they've purchased other companies in the rest of the world to expand their marketplace out there as well. When there's been a down economy in the United States, that company was still operating at full speed. They not only work in Harmony, but actually they've outgrown their production facilities there, and they have other companies that work with steel across southeast Minnesota building products for them and being involved with them. We also have Goodhue County. We go up here and we've got Red Wing Shoe, and we have the pottery industry, and Lake City. We've got the Hearth Technologies and Federal Mogul. You've got Cannon Falls, which had Multomeal. You get into Faribault, and you're dealing with Faribault and Owatonna, and you're dealing with glass that ended up in the new One World Trade Center. And also the stadium that's being built. The glass for that also goes up there. And then take a look Owatonna, you've got a lot of industries there as well. You also have some of the canning industries that are happening in this area as well. And take a look at Faribault and Albert Lee and Austin and the food processing that goes on there. And probably one of the world's largest manufacturers of cement mixer trucks is at Dodge Center. We have a lot of decisions that were made that makes Southeast Minnesota very strong. These decisions, many of them happened many years ago. So when we want to take a look, we get very much involved in my work at looking at what happens out here. We put together a report recently. A friend of ours in our division, Bridget Tuck, does a very good job of analyzing economic reports in some very detailed sectors. And we looked at every sector across the state, and we looked at Southeast Minnesota. When we take a look at Southeast Minnesota, first of all, look at Minnesota itself. $568 billion of output. $568 billion. Now, our area, Southeast Minnesota, does $51 billion. So that's about 9% of Minnesota, or if we take out the Twin Cities area, it's 24% of greater Minnesota. Occurs in our counties here from Albert Lee, Owatonna, Rice County, and east. That's a lot of output that occurs. Now, if you look at these industries, tell me, which of these industries do you think is number one for Southeast Minnesota as far as the billions of dollars of output? Take a guess.
Health and social services?
No. Take another guess. No. Agriculture is 4. I'll tell you that right now. Manufacturing, yes. Manufacturing is the largest one. We have a lot of manufacturing that goes on here. Remember, IBM is Southeast Minnesota. The largest cement truck manufacturers in Southeast Minnesota. Owatonna has a lot of manufacturers. There just are there's a lot of manufacturing that goes on in Southeast Minnesota. Manufacturing does 35% of that $51 billion. Okay, what's number 2? Nope, health is not number 2. Health is number 3. Nope, not government. Professional services, business and professional services, they make up 19%, and health and social services make up 14%. Agriculture and forestry and trade, which are like retail trade, wholesaling, things like that, make up, they're tied at 7%. Now, employment. We have about 235,000 workers. What is number 1 in employment? The health care and the social services are number 1 in employment. During the time from 2003 to 2013, we added about 10,480 workers. A lot of workers. But do you know we actually were lagging in the rest of the country in adding healthcare workers? We actually should have done a lot more if we were following the trend of the rest of the country. The thing is, we are very efficient. And we also had a very developed market here. So, yeah, maybe it's not a surprise that we didn't do as well as the rest of the country in our growth.
We were big to begin with.
We were big to begin with, that's right. Now, manufacturing, we lost in that 10-year period 5,513. However, if you look at the rest of the country, they lost more, and we actually maintained more workers than the rest of the country. So we've had a pretty strong economy. We've got friends in Wisconsin that keep saying, oh, Minnesota's a great economy and Wisconsin's a bad economy. You know, both economies are what they are, but we have a very diverse economy, And that has shown. And when I was doing some retail studies on what happened when we had the retail drop down, from like 2005 through 2009, actually Southeast Minnesota did much better than the rest of the state. And we climbed back quicker than the rest of the state. So, partly because our manufacturing and our diversity of industry allowed us to maintain salaries, and people were able to spend. Now, the Minnesota workforce, though, is changing. We've got a lot of industries here. We talked about all this manufacturing that's there. We've got a lot of retail. We've got a lot of healthcare workers. But our workforce is changing. The faces look different. The faces are looking more like me than my daughter. We're aging. When we take a look at what's happening with the percentage of people that are older, we're going to have more people turning 65 in this decade than we had the previous 4 decades combined. So we're having more between 2010 and 2019 than what happened from like 1970 to 2010. We have a lot of people that are turning older. That is making a major change in our workforce. By the time we reach 2020, it's estimated that the population that's 65 and older will exceed those who are ages 5 to 17. In other words, our K through 12, those who are in school. The older populations can be larger than the school-age kids. That is a big difference for us. That changes that workforce. Well, what do? Our workforce is getting close to retiring. Here's a map that basically shows the darker areas are where we have higher concentrations of those that are 65 and older. Notice this area, Wabasha, Winona, Hager City, and just across the river from Red Wing. Take a look here. We've got Albert Lee and Austin also have older workers. Now, you say, oh yeah, but Rochester, the lighter colors, we've got lower percentage of older people. Yeah, that's fine. But you've got to believe that these industries that are over here are going to be trying to attract those who are from the Rochester area to come there. And if they don't get the workers, what happens to those industries? Some of them are going to close. If they're thinking of expanding, are they going to expand locally? No. That creates a problem for us. All of a sudden, that feel good about Southeast Minnesota isn't there. If I showed you the whole map of Minnesota, at least we are better off than western and northwestern Minnesota. That map shows quite an aging group throughout the rest of the state. The Twin Cities still have some young ones and younger workers. Rochester still has younger workers because we've been attracting so many. But it is an issue. If we take a look, all these bars represent people who are over 65. The light blue is 65 to 74, then the 75 to 84s, and then those that are greater than 85. By the time we reach 2030, over 20% of the people are older than 65. And look at how large this group is from 75 to 84 and that 85 plus. Tell me what happens when people get that age? They get sick. Imagine, look at where we are now. 2015, we're under 15%. We're going to go over 20%. The healthcare expenses, the healthcare needs, the nursing home needs, the hospital needs, how that changes. We are in for some real change in this area. Now, this is all of Minnesota, but we're going to be seeing the same type of thing in this area. Remember, we're competing for workers with the rest of Minnesota and the rest of the country. look at Minnesota, our rate of growth we've had in our workforce. When we take a look at back in the 60s and 70s, 60 to 70s, we were growing our workforce at 1.9% annually. And then we reached 2.7% annually. And then we dropped 1.5%, 0.9, now we're at about 0.5. If we want to maintain economic growth, we probably need to maintain a 0.5% annual growth in workforce. If we don't, we're going to have worker shortages. Already, Sheila Cascaden had an article in the paper here a couple of weeks ago. It was talking about the workforce shortage. We already know of companies that have been approaching Albert Lee, Austin, Winona, saying, you know, we'd like to build our company here, but you don't have any workers. And they had to go someplace else. It used to be we talked jobs, jobs, jobs. We need to get employers because we've got all these college students that are coming out, and we need to have jobs for them. We can't have this unemployment. The new mantra is not jobs, jobs, jobs. It's skilled workers, skilled workers, skilled workers. We need to have people who can work at our industries because we have high-tech industries here. You're going to work at Mayo Clinic. You need to be a very skilled worker. You're going to be working in many of these manufacturing positions. Skilled workers. Many of these manufacturing ones are working with computers and all sorts of new equipment that require more skills than sitting on an assembly line and tightening this bolt, tightening that bolt, tightening that bolt. That's not the jobs we have. We are a very complex society in southeast Minnesota. This is a very telling slide. Right now, the projections of people moving into Minnesota, they're saying, oh, in 2016 to 2020, the official projection is about 33,400 people are going to move into Minnesota. But if we want to maintain 5% workforce growth, we need to have 83,000 people of work age. Not the 33 we're getting, but we need to have 83. We need an extra almost 50,000 workers. And take a look. There's 83,000 that we need. We're only getting, like I say, about 33. Then when it comes to 2026 to 2030, we need 214,000 more workers moving into Minnesota to maintain a 0.5% workforce growth. That's why I say when we talk about in the future here about immigrants coming into Minnesota, and we talk about kicking people out and sending them back to Mexico or wherever, we better think we need workers. Yes?
Is this picture similar in most states?
I have not looked at the other states. I would gather that in most of the northern states it is. Now Michigan's had such a problem with downturn economy that I would guess that they are not like this. But look at all the states now that are reporting unemployment less than 6 or 7%. That's going to be the case. I would say Texas is probably not. Some of those southern states are probably not there. And that's why when we take a look at expanding businesses, they're going to say, where do we have workforce? And where they do have some still unemployment rates that are a little bit higher in the south, that's where we're going to lose some of them to. But these numbers are large. We need workers. We need to get people that want to move here. And if we want southeast Minnesota to grow, we need them to move to southeast Minnesota. Now, that's not the only way that we can grow the workforce. First of all, we can retain our workers. Now, that might mean instead of retiring at 65, maybe you work another 5 years. Get the workers to stay until 70. Right now, that's my plan. I plan to work till 70. We also need to get people, instead of at 65 deciding to move to Florida, also to keep them here. But we need to retain. We also need all these college students that are going to Mankato, Rochester, Winona. We need them to stay in Minnesota and not head out east or head out west or south. We need to retrain some of the workers that we've got that are in lower skilled jobs. Very much what RCTC works on is retraining some of these people. And some of the industries themselves are taking that on themselves to retrain some of their employees to start doing more skilled jobs. The other thing is to recruit. We need to have Minnesota be a desirable place to live. That's why it's important when these lists come out and saying, where are the better places to live? We need Minnesota to show up on there. Because we need people to realize it is not the frozen wasteland between the two coasts. You know, when we take a look at our communities out there, I want you to think, are there some businesses right now that are looking to expand? Any in the news that are talking about growing? Who's the big one? Mayo. Any others? There may be some others that are talking about it too. You know, I don't know what's happening with Fastenal, if they're looking at increasing. We've just got a lot of businesses out there, though, they're looking for workers. Take a look at the ads that when people are trying to find people. Healthcare, home health care, some of the counties and looking for health workers, things like that. There are people, there are companies that are looking for workers and trying to bring them in. So we need to take a look at our things that we're doing right now. Are we training our people to take the jobs that we're going to need in the future? Are we bringing everyone in? Are we bringing our scores up in the schools the way we need to? This is a picture from Wilmer. They have a lot of new immigrants actually in Wilmer, and they've got professionals that are out there helping them understand business practices and helping them start their own businesses, getting those skills up there. That's important for them out there. When we take a look at the population maps of Minnesota, and we're looking at the population growth, the change between 1990 and 2000, and 2000 to 2010, the light colors are losses. These counties are losing population. The darker it is, the more they're gaining. Look at where they're gaining in 1990 to 2000, and you see some of that same thing happening here, but notice we've got Fillmore and Houston counties are losing. Freeborn County is losing. They were losing before, and they're continuing to lose. We are losing population. If we're trying to grow industries, that doesn't work. It means every worker that's left has to be more efficient and produce more product. So that's one way of looking at population, total population growth. One thing that I didn't realize till about a year ago, do you know that 43% of Minnesota residents move about every 5 years? If you take a look at the population from 5 years ago until now, you're going to find about 43% actually moved. We are a mobile population. The lowest county, it was about Lac-Opar County at 27. The highest was Benton up near St. Cloud at 52%. We are a mobile society. Now, that's why we saw some of those changes, population, some counties gained, some counties lost. Now, if you were in charge of a school, and you had 100 second graders last year, how many third graders do you think you'll have this year? 100. Okay, makes sense. Well, if you had 100 second graders 5 years ago, how many seventh graders do you have this year? Well, 100. But that's not what happens when we take a look at our population. Let's take a look at Olmsted County. 10 years ago, between 2000 and 2010, at 2010, the 25 to 29-year-olds, there was about 2,500 more than what there had been 10 years ago of 15 to 19-year-olds. Look at it in percentages. There were 29% more 25 to 29-year-olds than what was expected. And there was about 30 to 34-year-olds, there were 41% more. So we were seeing growth, people moving into this area in those age groups. Now go back to total population. Notice population was very consistent, but it's not consistent across every age group. The age groups are shifting. Take a look at Winona. Notice in 1900, Winona was about 50% larger than Rochester. But they haven't had the growth. What do we see here? There is, percentage-wise, 57% less 30 to 34-year-olds than what was expected. Why do you think that was? College graduates left the community and didn't stick around. They came to college, they went. You see the same thing up in the Twin Cities, Hennepin County. Notice that they gained those 25 to 29, they were 38% more than what was expected because all those students going to the various colleges up at the university and Hamlin and all the rest of the colleges up there, they saw pretty consistent growth. But then look what happens once you get to that 35 and 39-year-olds and above. They left. Same thing in Ramsey County. They gained them during those college years and that first job out of college. And then as they became 34 and above, they left. Remember we talked about 43% of Minnesotans move. This is that movement. Used to be called, when students left the counties, they called it brain drain. We were losing our people going out there. But what we've been seeing occur now in the last couple of decades is the brain gain. These people have been moving out of the Twin Cities and coming out into rural Minnesota. Why? Because of the simpler pace of life. They have gotten kids, and they don't want the kids to be growing up in the metropolitan areas as much. They say, I want to have a place where they can go out, and if I don't see them for a couple of hours, I can still know that they're safe. And the low housing cost. When we've surveyed the people, and this has been done between Nebraska and Minnesota, we've been looking at this information. These are the things that occur. Now, I've been working with Martin County, and they're thinking, we want to really bring back the people who used to live here, went to college, we want to bring them back. But when we look at the people that come back, or look at the people that move into the rural area, only 36% had lived there previously. Really, there's a bunch more people that had no experience there that are coming. A lot of them had good education, they had higher incomes, they had, about 51% had children, and 49 didn't. So that wasn't a big factor. They were generally leaving a career to come back to that area. They were oftentimes underemployed from what they previously were, but that quality of life is the main reason that they wanted to get out of the Twin Cities and get back to that simpler life. We've been looking at how do we help this occur? How do we help rural communities make themselves attractive? We asked people, are you going to be staying here? 77% in Minnesota, 60% in Nebraska had said, yeah, they're going to be living here 5 years from now. If they were younger, the percentage was a little bit lower. If they found the community friendly, the percentage was higher. They really liked that whole idea of living in rural Minnesota. Now, as I said, we really need to attract people to our area. One of the groups that is temporarily formed to do it is Southeast Minnesota Together. I mean, you've heard of DMC, Destination Medical Center. You've maybe heard of Journey to Growth, J2G, excuse me. Southeast Minnesota Together is basically a group that organically formed. It's got county commissioners, it's got planning and zoning people, it's got city administrators, it's got a couple company people. We're looking at how are we going to address this workforce in Southeast Minnesota. There's going to be some listening sessions that are going to be occurring, and I'll put a brochure on this over here if you're interested in participating. Please do. We're going to have meetings in Albert Lee, Owatonna, and Winona. We're having the DEED Commissioner, Department of Employment and Economic Development. But it's not going to be talking to, it's going to be, again, discussion. What can we do to keep our workforce coming to us? What can we do to make our communities more attractive? How do we welcome people into our communities? And it's not only companies that are in need of people. If we take a look at organizations, nonprofit organizations, government committees, the whole thing, the demand is going up and the supply of these leaders is going down. I was just looking on Facebook here a couple of days ago. I saw this one. The Schwartau Task Force needs new faces, needs more people involved, diverse people from what maybe the usual characters are. You take a look at any of these things and they're always looking for more leaders. When we look at the state of Minnesota, these maroon counties have had the percentage of people that are, or the number of nonprofits that need people and need leadership have gone up more than 30%. Just look at all the growth that's occurred. Even the yellow ones are 15% growth. There's a big demand for leaders of organizations. And if we're making decisions out here for our future, we need people in the organizations that are going to help lead and help the groups lead these decisions. In Rochester, we're not too bad. Olmsted County, we basically have to have someone step up and be a leader for every 1 in 43 people. You get into some of these counties and it's 1 in 16. In other words, 1 in 16 people in that county of 18 and older needs to be a leader of an organization. We've got some demands out there. That the need is increasing, the supply is decreasing. Well, the supply is increasing, but not at the rate we need, I guess maybe is a better way of doing it. We can never have enough leadership programs. Now, this is your chance. I've got just a handful of slides to go. This is your chance now to comment. You can comment. Do you want to share your experiences in organizational leadership? Are we having difficulty finding people to step up to lead? Do you have advice for others on getting people to step up and lead? You want to make a comment about workforce issues that we haven't covered, or we talked about a little bit, but you want to add something to. Maybe a comment about a decision that was made in the past that, now you think about it, oh yeah, I should have mentioned this. And also, if you have comments on what our most pressing issues or the effects are going to be. Maybe you can think of a decision right now that's being talked about that could have a big effect, but you don't know which way we should go. Can anyone think of a discussion that's happening right now that was a headline in the newspaper 2 days ago? Light rail is one, or actually high-speed rail. High-speed rail between here and the Twin Cities. You know, when we take a look at what we were just looking at and decisions that have a long-term effect, that's a long-term effect one. What is the right decision? I don't know. But maybe you have other ideas, decisions that we're going to have to be looking at. Does anyone want to make some comments? Yes. Let me get you a microphone.
I think currently a lot of the leadership in organizations is older, and we fail to understand how to communicate properly with the younger generation and maybe make changes that would make leadership more acceptable to them.
Any ideas on that?
Well, no, because I'm not that young anymore. But I mean, I've heard things that they don't want to make long-term commitments.
Yeah.
So how as an organization can we change to better map to that?
Yep. Yes.
Are we making the assumption that leadership is the same now as it used to be? From an organizational point of view, the emphasis on flat leadership, when once upon a time it used to be pyramid, so are you making the assumption that we still have a pyramid type of leadership in all of our organizations?
That's a good observation. You know, a couple of things I'll comment on that. And the IRS typically says if you're going to have a nonprofit organization, you have to have 3 people who assume a leadership position, even if it's flat, and you're really discussing participation. The other thing that has to happen, if you're going to have a flat organization, you need to have someone who can facilitate that discussion that works in a flat organization, that's going to make sure all the voices are heard. So, yeah, maybe the leadership titles are different, but the need for people taking a leadership role of some sort is still there.
The DMC plan supposedly is going to create 35,000 to 40,000 jobs. Could you comment on where those people are going to come from?
You bring up a real key point about tonight's talk, is that if we're going to see 35,000 positions that are going to happen because we're going to make this a destination, we have to be able to attract those workers, train those workers, retrain those workers, and make it work. If we don't, it's not going to happen. And that's why we're seeing the discussion now. We need to get the workers. Yeah.
I think I can talk loud enough.
Okay.
You had those 3 R's of retain and retrain and so on. Maybe the high-speed rail will help with another one of those R's, and that is relocate, and helping people come in a fast way from the Twin Cities and up the road, if some of the politicians can forget their provincialism along the way up their highway.
Yeah, it's one of those things when we talk about high-speed rail. There's a device for discussion called implications wheel, where you're looking at the consequences, unintended consequences that happen from any decision. And it'd be interesting to look at this and say, okay, if we put in high-speed rail, what will that mean? And you have to list both the positives and negatives, and then you get into the next step saying, oh, if that happens, then what are the positive and negatives that come from that? But the whole idea of looking at what does that mean, you know, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. I don't know whether it should go forward or not. That's not my decision to make, but that's all our decisions to be made. We need to have the input from everyone to tell people, what do we think? Stephen, or Dwayne.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. It's interesting that you brought up the high-speed rail. I happen to be serving on the 27-member committee entitled the Zip Rail Citizens Advisory Committee. There's 27 committee members from all walks of life. I think the reason I was selected is because I am from Pine Island and my farm is on the west side of Highway 52, and it's just a name and an address that kind of popped out on the folks who did the selection. But there's a lot of questions that we are addressing or we're trying to discuss. We've only had one meeting so far, and there's a lot of questions about whether the zip rail is affordable with the tax base that southeastern Minnesota has, where the money's coming from. There's talk about a private entity that will be paying for all of it or some of it. It depends on who you talk to. What will be the ridership? Who will benefit? Who will pay for it? There's way more questions than answers. And I came here tonight looking for answers. because when the next meeting comes around, I'd like to have a little more add a little more substance to the discussion, and right. It's a question that's not going to go away because more millions are being poured into the studies of whether we should have zip rail or not. It just seems to be an issue that keeps getting funded for more and more studies all the time, and we need to find a resolution to these issues.
Right, and will elevated make a difference from track? And Stephen, you want to?
You know, I just want to make a comment about the zip rail. I don't know what the connection is, but I was thinking about one of your comments earlier about use what you have. There are 7 states in the United States, there's 7 states in the U.S. that have 2 or more entities that expend more than $500 million a year on research. Minnesota is one of those 7 states. It's the smallest of the 7 states to have 2 or more, and that's University of Minnesota Mayo Clinic. And a lot of what we talk about, I think it gets us in good economic positions long term, is that intellectual property. One of the assets that Rochester has in the region is we have more patents here per capita. I think we're rated number 2 in the nation or so in terms of more patents. We have more patents here than Minneapolis does. But the other question I was a statement, and I'm sorry, it's just some, maybe not so much a statement, but just some facts. I'm thinking about the workforce pressures. And then I'm also, and whether this is true or not, what I've heard is that the manufacturing sector has recovered, because remember there was this period where it was all moving overseas, and now it's recovered locally, but it recovered, and this is what I've read, and maybe it's not true, recovered without the workforce, without increases of workforce. In other words, there was technology that began to increase productivity with a lower workforce. You're shaking your head like there's some truth to that.
Yes.
So I'm just saying, if we have all this workforce shortage, this seems to me that one of the solutions is there's going to be some technology. I mean, we've been doing more and more, trying to become more and more productive with fewer people. I mean, that's been the pressure for the last decade. I think what you're saying is we're going to see that pressure, extreme pressure, going forward.
Right, that's a lot where the retrain comes in, because the jobs that are going to be available have to be able to deal with that technology that makes them more efficient.
Yeah, just looking at your presentation so far, it really talked quite a bit about the traditional model workforce. The last 10, 15 years, there's a lot of telecommuting.
Yep.
So, like IBM, for example, a pretty high percentage, I don't know what the latest number is, almost 10, 15, 20% of the population. For example, for the last 10 years when I was working at IBM, I had an office here, but I never went there, and I spent most of my time around the world. So you know, as the business model and the organizational structure changes, as leaders in the industry and so forth, we ought to be looking at other alternative models, including, for example, as you talked about earlier, in Ramsey and Hennepin County, people are a little bit tired about the safety, about the congestion and all that. Wouldn't that be nice if they would build something in Maple Grove, have a subsidiary up there, and you know, have a small team of people located up there, and they can retain all the people. So, just wondering, are the industrial leaders thinking along those lines or not?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, we have talked a lot about the traditional model, and you're right. We do need to be able to look at that.
In the very beginning, when you asked about changes, no one really mentioned when Interstate 90 came through, and there was lots of opposition to that, particularly by the people whose land was being used. I see that same opposition now of the light rail. And it's unfortunate that that happens, but that's part of the progress, it seems to me. And it seems to me that the light rail is replacing the Interstate 90. And all the interstates, not just 90, but it's the similarity. Another thing you very lightly touched on that I think we really have to look for is the use of immigrants, the training of them, and there are professional immigrants that can fill some of those positions too.
Yeah. We'll take two more comments, and then I think I need to go to the closing slides so we leave. Okay.
I think this has been an excellent presentation, but the one thing that bothers me is with the DMC proposition for this area is we seem to be neglecting to talk about the number of people that are going to be required in the service industry to support that initiative. All the discussion has been on professional, technical side of personnel.
Yep. And Kurt, did you want to make a comment? And that'll be the last one.
I concur. This has been a very informative discussion. I think the gentleman over here also talked about flattening organizational models. One of the things that really hit me when he said that is we used to transfer knowledge. We used to mentor. We used to have layers of leadership, middle management it used to be called, and then there was a model that said get rid of that. Now, what we failed to do is bring up the next generation of leaders. So part of it has to come from us. If it is to be, it starts with me. So I think a key focus here is to find ways to transfer knowledge. And I'm just going to use a quick illustration. The honor flights have resulted in stories being told that were never told for many, many years. And people are astounded to hear those stories. And I think we have stories that we should tell that help people see and catch a vision of what the future could look like if we transfer knowledge and create an environment where we groom the next leaders. And so to me, that seems like one of the keys here is to start grooming our next generation of leaders.
I want to thank all of you for your participation in this. This was really strong. And I encourage you, if you get a chance and you want to participate in these workforce discussions, take one of the flyers for the meetings. We'd certainly like to have you there. I'm just going to close with another quote from the era of Teddy Roosevelt. In 1909, Teddy Roosevelt's Commission on the Country Life described the goal of extension in this way. It is to the Extension Department of the land-grant colleges that we must now look for the most effective rousing of the people of the land. It is of the greatest consequence that the people of the open country should learn to work together, not only for the purpose of forwarding their economic interests and of competing with other men who are organizing, but also to develop themselves and to establish an effective spirit, or community spirit. When we take a look at the discussion we've had tonight, and we look at the decisions that have been made in the past that affect us now and what we're going into the future, we need to take a look at what do we have and build on what we have and look for new ways of working. As was mentioned, we're going to need to look at how else can we work. We need to look at what's happening in retail, what's happening if we lose this business, well, how does it affect our community? If we bring in this business, how does it affect our community? If we bring in or we lose high-speed rail, what does it do for our community? We need to look at some of these things and make some decisions. Take a look at what we currently have. We need to take a look at newcomers. How can we bring newcomers into this area? How do we make them feel welcome? How do we help them be as productive as they want to be? And as was mentioned, that the most important single ingredient to the formula of success is knowing how to get along with people. We haven't seen great examples of that in political leadership these days, but we need to make it happen in southeast Minnesota and really all of Minnesota if we're going to continue to be leaders in this country. This is the team that I work with. We're the community economics team for the University of Minnesota. We help people analyze what is currently the situation. How have things changed in the past? What are the trends that are happening in the communities, whether it be retail, whether it be businesses closing, businesses opening, produce reports like that economic composition report. But we also have another group of individuals that are leadership and civic engagement. They help train people on how to be leaders. They work with cohorts of individuals throughout the state in many organizations, whether it be in soil and water conservation districts or watersheds or city governments or communities. Brown County has an organization that they're looking to develop leaders within Brown County, and that's been replicated in different parts of the state. But learning how to lead and how to get people involved and listen and make changes out there and make effective changes. We're not the only organization doing it. Blandon Foundation has been very important on helping develop leaders across the state. Actually, Dwayne, who's back here, talking about Zip Rail, he had gone through a program a number of years ago looking at agricultural leaders. Am I right with Marl?
My lead program was
Or my lead.
between Minnesota and Iowa agriculture leaders.
Right.
20 from Minnesota, 20 from Iowa.
Yeah.
And we shared each other's experiences, visited each other's state capitals, and together went out to Washington, D.C. and had leadership training out there.
Yeah. So, it's important. We really work on developing leaders, and we've got the programs. Looking back at one of his first quotes, do what you can with what you have and where you are, kind of matches up with what our mission is in our Center for Community Vitality, which is what I work with. We're trying to strengthen the social and civic, economic, and technology capabilities or capacities of our communities. We're trying to inform the decisions that the communities are making. We're trying to improve the process that they use. We're trying to enhance the skills and the ability and confidence of the people who lead and decide, and increase the number of people who step up and lead. That's what we're trying to do. That's my commercial on what our organization is doing and what the people that I work with, what we try to do. I thank you for your time. If you want to connect with us, you'll actually find us on Facebook. Just look for University of Minnesota Extension Center for Community Vitality. We're there. You can see what's going on. Our webpage, extension.umn.edu. And just click on whenever you see the word community, click on it. It'll get you to us. And also, you can make contact with, I'm at the Heinz Center, but you can contact the county extension office as well, and they'll make contact with us. Thank you for your time and participating. You were great participants in your presentation.